Imagine a contract where you surrender 71% of your week just to get 29% back to actually live your life. You didn't negotiate this deal, but 4 billion people follow it every single week without ever asking who made the rules. The 5-day work week wasn't handed down by God or biology. It was created by a 1920s factory hangover and a brilliant corporate marketing trick. This is the story of how an 80-year-old assembly line rule became the biggest time trap in human history. Before the weekend existed, there was just work, 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day, Sunday off for church, and that was the deal. Factory workers in 1800s Britain had exactly one guaranteed rest day, and the factory owners intended to keep it that way. But something kept going wrong on Mondays. Workers would show up Sunday evening to the pub instead of bed. They'd drink through the night. And on Monday morning, nothing. No show. Empty looms. Furious foremen. They called it Saint Monday. The unofficial, completely unauthorized second day of rest that working-class Britain invented for itself. Workers weren't lazy. They were exhausted. 6 12-hour days don't leave you sharp on Monday morning. They leave you looking for any exit you can find. Factory output on Mondays was a disaster, and factory owners who were ruthless about efficiency started to notice something uncomfortable. Forcing people to work 6 days wasn't actually producing 6 days of work. But before they could solve that problem, a completely unrelated argument walked through the factory gates. In 1908, a cotton spinning mill in New England was dealing with a workforce that didn't all pray on the same day. Their Jewish employees needed Saturday off for the Sabbath. Their Christian employees needed Sunday. One group kept getting forced to choose between their faith and their paycheck. The mill's solution was radical for its time, close on both days. Give everyone Saturday and Sunday. It was the first 2-day weekend in American industrial history. Not because workers demanded it, not because the government required it, because the math of religious accommodation accidentally produced the most popular policy in the history of employment. And here's what the mill owners noticed almost immediately. Output went up. Workers who came back after a 2-day rest made fewer mistakes. The looms ran cleaner. The defect rate dropped. 2 days of rest, it turned out, produced more than 6 days of grinding. The 2-day weekend wasn't designed. It wasn't a workers' rights victory. Not yet. It was a scheduling compromise between 2 religious calendars that happened to make the factory more money, which meant it had exactly one thing that would eventually make it universal. It was profitable. But knowledge of what worked in one New England mill didn't automatically spread across the country. For that to happen, someone much larger and much louder would have to get involved. Henry Ford announced in 1926 that all Ford Motor Company factories would move to a 5-day, 40-hour work week, no pay cut, same wages, 2 days off. Other industrialists were furious. They called it reckless. Anti-competitive, the beginning of the end. And Henry Ford smiled, because they had completely misunderstood why he did it. Ford's workers weren't leaving the factory on Saturday to rest and recover so they could be better workers on Monday. That was a side effect. The reason Ford wanted them out of the factory on Saturday was so they would have time to drive. Ford had figured out something that sounds obvious in retrospect, but was genuinely revolutionary in 1926. Exhausted workers trapped in factories 6 days a week don't have time to buy things. And Ford's business model depended entirely on people buying things, specifically automobiles. The 2-day weekend was explicitly a consumer engineering project. Ford even said so publicly. He told the New York Times that workers needed leisure time to use the products that American industry was producing. Think about what that means. The thing you probably think of as a gift from your employer, your 2 days of freedom per week, was designed from the beginning to be 2 days of spending. Rest, yes. Recovery, Sure, but rest just long enough to have money left to spend and energy left to spend it. Other manufacturers followed Ford within a decade, not because they cared about their workers' well-being, because Ford's productivity numbers proved the model worked and his sales numbers proved the model sold. But there was still a problem. Some companies still ran 6 days, some ran 7, and there was nothing, legally, forcing any of them to stop. That was about to change, not because workers finally won, because the entire economy collapsed. By 1929, the United States economy had destroyed itself. Unemployment hit 25%, 25%. 1 in 4 workers had no job at all. The argument for reducing hours shifted completely. It stopped being about rest or productivity or consumer theory. It became about sharing. If you cut everyone's hours, the logic went, you spread the available work across more people. Fewer families with 0 income, more families with some. In 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. It set the maximum standard work week at 40 hours. Anything beyond that had to be paid at 1.5 times the normal rate, the overtime premium we still use today. The 5-day, 40-hour week was now law, hammered into the legal code during a depression designed for factories and assembly lines, built around the idea that physical presence equals productive work, and there it stayed. 1938 to now, 86 years, give or take, of the same arrangement. The typewriter gave way to the word processor. The factory floor gave way to the open-plan office. The office gave way to the laptop. The laptop followed you home. And still, 5 days on, 2 days off, an assembly line schedule for people who have never worked an assembly line. Here's the uncomfortable part. The 40-hour week made sense in 1938 because factory output was literally proportional to hours worked. More hours at the loom, more fabric. More hours at the line, more cars. Stop working, stop producing. Simple math. But knowledge work doesn't work like that. A programmer doesn't produce twice as much code by working twice as many hours. A writer doesn't write twice as many good sentences. A designer doesn't design twice as well. Beyond a certain point, research consistently puts it somewhere around 6 hours of focused work. Output doesn't grow with hours. It shrinks. Errors go up. Creativity goes down. What you get is longer days producing worse work. Studies on knowledge workers put peak productive hours at around 6 per day. Not 8, not 10, 6. After that, you're not producing. You're just present. You're paying a presence tax. The hours between 6 and 10 don't add to your output. They subtract from your recovery, which means tomorrow's 6 hours will be slightly worse than today's. Compound that across a 40-hour week, across a 40-year career, and you start to understand why everyone is so tired all the time. Iceland ran a massive trial of the 4-day work week from 2015 to 2019. Over 2,500 workers across hospitals, schools, social services, government offices. Productivity didn't fall. In most cases, it held steady or improved. Worker well-being improved significantly. By 2023, roughly 86% of Iceland's workforce had moved to reduced or flexible hours. The UK ran its own trial, same result. Japan, New Zealand, Belgium, country after country finding the same thing. The 5-day week isn't protecting productivity. It's just protecting familiarity. So here's what actually happened. In the 1800s, workers invented Saint Monday because they needed rest, and nobody was offering it. In 1908, a mill in New Hampshire gave workers 2 days off to solve a religious scheduling problem and accidentally improved output. In 1926, Henry Ford gave workers Saturday off to give them time to buy his cars. In 1938, the U.S. government made 40 hours the legal standard to spread scarce work during a depression. And at no point in that chain did anyone sit down and ask, what's the optimal amount of time for a human being to work in a week? Nobody ran that experiment. Nobody asked workers what they needed. The weekend wasn't designed, it accumulated, which is either reassuring or terrifying, depending on how you look at it. Reassuring because this isn't the natural order of things. It's not biology. It's not physics. It's just policy. And policy can change. Terrifying because a scheduling compromise from 1908 and a sales strategy from 1926 are still running most of the working world nearly a century later. The question isn't whether the weekend was a good idea. 2 days of rest is obviously better than one. The question is, why did we stop at 2? You are currently enrolled in a contract designed by a New England religious compromise, supercharged by a Detroit car salesman, and codified by a government trying to prevent economic collapse. None of those people were thinking about you specifically. The 5-day week will probably change in your lifetime, not because employers will decide to be kind, but because the productivity data will eventually be impossible to ignore. It always comes down to the numbers. It did in 1908, it did in 1926, it did in 1938, and in the meantime, you have 2 days. 71% of your week belongs to the schedule. 29% belongs to you. Spend it like you mean it. Watch for the silent one. He's been keeping count.